Good evening. I'm bringing you a story that shocked America in the mid-1990s. A case so disturbing it seems ripped from a crime novel, yet it's tragically real. Tonight, we investigate the Texas Cadet Murder Case, where ambition, obsession, and jealousy collided in the most horrific way imaginable. December 4th, 1995, Grand Prairie, Texas. A farmer makes a gruesome discovery in a desolate field, the battered body of 16-year-old Adrianne Jones. She'd been beaten savagely and shot twice in the head. The young sophomore, described by friends as vivacious and full of life, was found lying in the cold Texas dirt, her future stolen in an instant. Her skull bore the deep impressions of blunt force trauma. Blood stained the winter grass around her. But this wasn't a random act of violence. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a crime of opportunity. The truth behind Adrianne's murder would take 9 agonizing months to uncover, and when it did, it revealed a twisted tale of 2 decorated honor students' military academy dreams, and a love so obsessive, so all-consuming, it turned deadly. Diane Zamora and David Graham, remember those names. High school sweethearts who met in 1991 as volunteers in the Texas Civil Air Patrol. She was an honor roll student bound for the Naval Academy at Annapolis, destined to become a midshipman, possibly an astronaut. He was a track star with an appointment to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Both were top of their class, model citizens with bright futures serving their country. They were the golden couple, the success story every parent dreams of. Ambitious, disciplined, in love. But beneath the polished surface lurked something far more sinister. Let me take you back to November 4th, 1995. David Graham is returning from a cross-country track meet in Lubbock, Texas. In his car is Adrianne Jones, a 16-year-old sophomore from Mansfield High School. She's also on the track team, a popular girl known for her school spirit, her bright smile, her flirtatious nature. Friends remembered her as someone who spent hours on her makeup, who had strict parents, who was just beginning to experience the freedom of teenage life. According to David Graham's later confession, and this is crucial, Adrianne asked him to take a detour. Behind an elementary school in the darkness, Graham claims they had sex. A brief encounter. Meaningless, he would later say, but devastating in its consequences. Consumed by guilt, Graham did what he thought was the right thing. Around December the 1st, he confessed his infidelity to Diane Zamora. What happened next defies comprehension. Diane Zamora's reaction wasn't just anger, it was volcanic rage. Witnesses later testified that she became hysterical, violent, uncontrollable. In her own written confession, Zamora described screaming so hard she was hyperventilating, banging her head against walls and floors, trying to crack her own skull open because she couldn't bear the pain of betrayal. You see, for Diane Zamora, this wasn't merely infidelity. This was the destruction of something she held sacred. She had prided herself on her virginity, her purity. When she finally gave herself to Graham, the man she planned to marry in the year 2000, the man she would walk under crossed swords with at their military wedding, she believed their relationship was perfect, untainted, pure. And Adrianne Jones had stolen that from her. In that moment of rage, witnesses say Zamora screamed at Graham, "Kill her! Kill her!" And David Graham, so devoted to Diane, so terrified of losing her, so enthralled by what he called her beautiful eyes, agreed. He made a promise. And David Graham never broke his promises. For the next few weeks, the couple spent their time trying to reach Adrianne. Nothing was premeditated in the traditional sense. This was a crime of passion, executed with military precision but driven by raw emotion. They weren't master criminals. They were teenagers acting on impulse, on obsession, on a toxic love that demanded blood as proof of devotion. The plan was simple, brutal, but simple. David would call Adrianne and arrange a late-night meeting. He'd lure her out under the pretense of another romantic encounter. Then he'd drive her to a remote location near Joe Pool Lake. Diane would be hiding in the hatchback of her green Mazda protege. She would come up behind Adrianne, snap her neck, quick and painless like in the movies, and they'd weigh down the body and sink it to the bottom of the lake. No body, no crime. They'd go on with their lives. On the night of December 3rd, 1995, around 10:30 p.m., David Graham made the call. Adrianne's mother answered. When Graham identified himself as David from the cross-country team, she allowed her daughter to take the call despite their strict 10 p.m. phone curfew. After all, he sounded like a nice young man. That phone call sealed Adrianne's fate. Sometime after midnight, around 12:30 a.m. on December 4th, Adrianne Jones snuck out of her house. Her brother watched her leave, later saying she appeared perfectly fine, walking out of her own accord. She climbed into Graham's car, probably excited, maybe nervous. She thought this was a date. She had no idea that in the back of the car, curled up in the trunk, Diane Zamora was waiting with dumbbells and a gun. Graham drove for 15 to 20 minutes. He pulled onto a deserted road. The night was dark, cold, silent, and then the violence began. David Graham leaned his seat back, pretending to kiss Adrianne. This was the signal. Diane Zamora pulled down the hatch that connected the trunk to the back seat and emerged like something from a nightmare. When Adrianne saw Diane, she panicked. David held her down, trying to calm her, saying, "It's okay, we just want to talk to you." But Adrianne knew. In that moment, she knew. Diane questioned her about the affair. Adrianne, terrified, said she didn't enjoy it, that there was too much guilt, but it was the way she looked at Diane when she said it. That look is what Diane would later say she could never forget. Those eyes haunted her. Diane became hysterical all over again. She screamed at David, "Just do it, just do it." A struggle ensued. David tried to break Adrianne's neck, twisting it the way he'd seen in movies, but necks don't snap that easily in real life. Adrianne fought back, terrified, fighting for her life. Diane reached for the dumbbells on the floor of the car. Her hands were shaking violently. She swung, missed, swung again, missed. The third time she connected. The dumbbell struck Adrianne in the head with devastating force. The impact left deep depressions in her skull. But Adrianne Jones wasn't dead. Somehow, through sheer will to survive, she managed to escape. She slipped through the car window and ran into the dark field, bleeding, disoriented, desperate. David Graham grabbed his 9mm Makarov pistol. He couldn't let her get away. She was the witness, the one person who could destroy everything. He jumped out of the car and tracked her through the darkness. Adrianne collapsed in the field before he reached her. Her injuries were too severe. She fell to the cold ground, probably praying, probably thinking of her family. David Graham stood over her, and he fired twice, 2 shots to the head, point blank. When he returned to the car, covered in blood, shaking, he and Diane Zamora looked at each other. According to his confession, they said, "I love you," to each other. Then Diane spoke the words that would echo through the courtroom years later. "We shouldn't have done that, David." No, they shouldn't have, but they had. And now they had to cover it up. They drove to the home of David's friend, John Green. Graham was pale, vomiting, sick to his stomach. Diane cleaned his bloody clothes in the bathroom while he slept. They disposed of the evidence in a dumpster near Diane's house. They cleaned the blood from inside the car, blood that had splattered on the passenger door, evidence that would later contradict their claims about where Adrianne was first struck. Then they went to Diane's house and slept by the fire, both terrified that police would knock on the door at any moment. The next morning, David's father called to wake him for school. During that conversation, his father asked, "Did you hear about that girl from Mansfield that was killed?" That's when they knew for certain. Adrianne Jones was dead, and they were murderers. The following weeks were torture for both of them. Neither could eat. Graham was constantly pale, jittery, jumping at every sound. Zamora had nightmares, waking up screaming. They went to church constantly, praying for God's forgiveness, praying to be sent back in time to undo what they'd done. At school, the murder was announced over the intercom. Everyone was talking about it, crying, mourning, and David Graham had to sit there day after day listening to tributes for a girl he'd killed. He saw Adrianne's mother in the grocery store. He read newspaper articles about her grieving family. In one article, Adrianne's mother, Linda Jones, said something that haunted Graham. She said, "I hope that her killer is out there and he's just being eaten up with guilt." He was. But guilt doesn't bring back the dead. For 9 months, the murder went unsolved. Police had questioned David Graham in the days following Adrianne's death, but because of his spotless reputation and apparently distant connection to the victim, they didn't pursue him further. They even questioned and briefly arrested a 17-year-old boy named Brian McMillan, but released him when no physical evidence linked him to the crime. The trail went cold until the summer of 1996. David Graham was at the Air Force Academy in Colorado completing basic training. Diane Zamora was at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, struggling to adjust to military life, struggling to be away from Graham. She was isolated, stressed, and perhaps most dangerous, she was talkative. In late August 1996, during a late-night conversation in her dorm room, Diane Zamora told her 2 roommates an incredible story. She confessed that she and David Graham had murdered someone. She said they loved each other so much they'd killed to prove it. She described the crime in chilling detail, the planning, the attack, the gunshots, the disposal of evidence. Her roommates were horrified, but they faced a terrible dilemma. The Naval Academy has a strict honor code, the Brigade of Midshipmen Honor concept, which requires all midshipmen to report wrongdoing by fellow officers. Failure to do so means dismissal. Torn between loyalty to their roommate and their duty to the Navy, Zamora's roommates made the agonizing decision to report her confession to the naval chaplain. The chaplain contacted the naval attorney, and the naval attorney contacted police in Grand Prairie, Texas. On September 6, 1996, detectives flew to Annapolis to question Diane Zamora. She initially claimed she'd made the whole story up. Navy officials suspended her and sent her home pending investigation. But on her way back to Texas, Zamora did something revealing. She switched flights and flew to Colorado to see David Graham before police could question him. She wanted to get their stories straight, but it was too late. When detectives questioned David Graham at the Air Force Academy, he failed a polygraph test, and then he broke. He confessed everything. He typed out a detailed statement describing the murder, the planning, the execution, the aftermath. He implicated Diane Zamora as the mastermind, the one who demanded Adrianne's death, the one who struck the first blow. 2 days later, on September 8th, Diane Zamora was arrested in Texas. She, too, gave a confession, a handwritten statement that painted David as the dominant partner, the one who pulled the trigger, the one who couldn't let Adrianne escape. The golden couple had turned on each other. On February 6, 1998, Diane Zamora's trial began in Fort Worth, Texas, presiding Judge Joe Drago III. The case had already become a media sensation. Court TV recorded some of its highest ratings ever covering the trial. NBC had even produced a made-for-television movie called Love's Deadly Triangle: The Texas Cadet Murder, though the local Dallas-Fort Worth NBC affiliate refused to air it, citing concerns about prejudicing the jury. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Diane Zamora, consumed by jealous rage, ordered David Graham to kill Adrianne Jones. She participated in the murder, helped plan it, and struck the victim with a dumbbell. Under Texas law, this constituted capital murder, murder with an underlying felony of kidnapping, since Adrianne was deceptively lured from her home. The defense portrayed Diane as a victim herself, a submissive young woman mentally and sexually abused by the domineering David Graham. They claimed she was present when Adrianne died but didn't strike the girl and was horrified when Graham pulled the trigger. On February 10th, Diane Zamora took the stand in her own defense. She testified that she had merely memorized and repeated Graham's confession to police under duress. She claimed she was supposed to take the blame for everything because Graham still had a future at the Air Force Academy and hers was pretty much over. She told the jury that prosecution witnesses, friends who said she'd confessed to them, who said she'd called Adrianne a tramp, who said she'd told them she'd kill Adrianne again if she could, were all lying or had misunderstood her. The prosecution called this a national conspiracy theory. In closing arguments, Assistant Prosecutor Michelle Hartman said, "By her words, she is the victim of the justice system. A lying best friend, lying roommate, an abusive boyfriend, and even of the U.S. Naval Academy." On February 17, 1998, after more than 6 hours of deliberations over 2 days, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty, capital murder. Diane Zamora showed no emotion as the verdict was read. She automatically received a mandatory life sentence because prosecutors, at the request of the Jones family, were not seeking the death penalty. She would be eligible for parole after 40 years, in the year 2036. One juror later told the Associated Press that Diane's own confession was the most damning evidence. No matter how you look at it, the juror said, Adrianne Jones would still be alive if not for Diane Zamora. When the sentence was read, one of Zamora's relatives gasped, "Oh God!" Family members collapsed, clutching each other, praying in a circle with their pastor. But it was Adrianne's family who delivered the most devastating testimony. Her father, Bill Jones, spoke slowly, fighting his emotions. "We all loved and enjoyed Adrianne very much. We all looked forward to a life with her. We will never know what heights she would have risen to because of this animal act. And we shall have to wonder the rest of our lives." 6 months later, on July 24, 1998, David Graham was also convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. But here's where this case takes its strangest turn, the turn that leaves us with more questions than answers. Did the sexual encounter between David Graham and Adrianne Jones even happen? Grand Prairie Police Sergeant Alan Patton, who took Zamora's confession, doesn't think so. He believes Graham fabricated the entire affair to make Diane jealous, to manipulate her emotions, to bind her to him through a shared crime. Sergeant Patton stated, David had lied to Diane about an alleged sexual tryst that never happened with Adrianne Jones. If he had said, "I was just kidding, I was just trying to make you jealous," Adrianne Jones would still be alive today. Think about the implications. A 16-year-old girl murdered over an affair that may never have occurred. A crime born not from actual infidelity but from manufactured jealousy. A psychological game that spiraled into cold-blooded murder. In 2003, while serving her sentence at the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas, Diane Zamora did something bizarre. She married another inmate, Stephen Mora, in a proxy wedding, a ceremony where stand-ins represented the imprisoned couple in what was Bexar County's first proxy marriage. They divorced in 2010. Then on April 8, 2007, Diane Zamora sat down for an interview with Stone Phillips on Dateline NBC. Her appeals had been exhausted. With her lawyer's permission, she agreed to take a polygraph test administered by Dateline. Her story had changed again. Now she claimed that she and Graham were breaking up at the time of the murder and that Graham used the killing to tie her to him, to bind her to him through shared guilt. She admitted to being an accessory after the fact, to cleaning the car, to obstructing justice, but she denied intending to kill Adrianne Jones. During the polygraph, the administrator repeatedly told her to stop her exaggerated breathing, a known countermeasure for beating lie detector tests. When the results came in, Dateline's polygraph administrator said he believed Zamora had failed the crucial question about whether she intended to kill Adrianne. 2 independent polygraph experts, asked to review the results, said they couldn't offer an opinion due to the countermeasures Zamora employed. Zamora's explanation: she was nervous, hyperventilating, despite knowing all the questions in advance and reviewing them with the administrator before the test. So what's the truth? Who was really responsible for Adrianne Jones's death? Was Diane Zamora a manipulative mastermind who demanded murder as proof of love? Or was she a victim of David Graham's psychological manipulation, an abuse survivor who got caught in a web she didn't weave? Was David Graham a devoted boyfriend who killed to keep the woman he loved? Or was he a master manipulator who invented an affair to enrage his girlfriend, then used the resulting murder to control her forever? The truth is, we may never know. What we do know is this: Diane Zamora, inmate number 0814993, remains incarcerated at the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas. David Graham, inmate number 008373888, is serving his sentence at the Ellis unit in Walker County. Both will be eligible for parole on September 5, 2036. They've seen each other only once since their arrests, at a pretrial hearing under guard, separated by the cold machinery of justice. The love that once seemed so pure, so perfect, so all-consuming died in that field with Adrianne Jones. Adrianne's family has never recovered. How could they? Their daughter, sister, their bright light was extinguished at 16. She never graduated high school, never went to college, never fell in love, got married, had children, never achieved her dreams. All because two people decided their love was worth more than her life. But I want you to think about something tonight as you consider this case. Think about the nature of obsession. Think about how love, when twisted and corrupted, can become the most dangerous force in the world. Think about how two honor students, two model citizens, two young people with everything to lose could commit an act so brutal, so senseless, so irreversible. And think about this. Somewhere in the evidence, in the confessions, in the testimonies, lies the real truth about what happened on the night of December 3rd, 1995. But that truth is buried beneath layers of lies, manipulation, conflicting stories, and self-preservation. Maybe Diane Zamora is telling the truth now and she was lying then. Maybe David Graham fabricated everything, the affair, the jealousy, the shared guilt, as part of some twisted psychological game we'll never fully understand. Or maybe they're both still lying. Maybe the real story of what happened in that car, in that field, will die with them. What we're left with is a mystery wrapped in a murder, wrapped in a love story gone horribly wrong. The Texas Cadet Murder Case stands as a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears an honor roll badge. Sometimes it wears a military uniform. Sometimes it looks like the perfect couple next door. This has been our investigation into the Texas Cadet murder. The case that proves the most dangerous obsession is the one that demands blood as proof of devotion. Somewhere tonight, in separate Texas prisons, Diane Zamora and David Graham are living with what they've done, living with the memory of Adrianne Jones's last moments, living with the knowledge that their perfect, pure love required murder. Good night.